Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Monday, September 30th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael-Sam hybrid Monday. It's the Jewish holidays. Challah. Sam making me be a bad half-Jew, Jamie be a bad full Jew. We're working. He's repentant, hopefully.
I went to my grandma's house last night. Thank you very much.
Very nice. I'm sorry, Hashem. That was my impression of Sam. But I can't promise to speak nicer about Chuck Schumer. On today's program, Thom Hartmann. Sam just interviewed him. Radio legend Thom Hartmann. They were talking about impeachment, other important things going on in the news. Rudy Giuliani said that Mike Pompeo pushed him to open the just false investigation of Joe Biden in Ukraine, which is not to say that Joe Biden's kid didn't get a job. That is clearly nepotism.
Dropout Joe. Trump reportedly worked with two off-the-books lawyers to pressure Ukraine for damaging information about Joe Biden. Schiff is planning on asking for documents from Rudy. Trump's envoy to Ukraine resigns. New partnership announced between California and China, facilitated by former California Governor Jerry Brown on the climate crisis. Barbados Prime Minister, she's incredible. She spoke with absolute courage about U.S. interventionism in Venezuela at the UN General Assembly. Lindsey Graham is so indignant. Bernie Sanders has a lead in Nevada. Is it time for a bunch of other candidates should drop out pieces? And new speculation that a AOC endorsement might be going in the right direction. But it's all speculation. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Folks, I have never been somebody who has, I like Robert De Niro. He's great. I think when he says F Trump, okay, doesn't do anything for me. The last time he did it at the Tonys, what did do something for me was that these guys in Staten Island took down like their Goodfellas posters in their houses and like beat them with baseball bats.
Nice.
That was awesome. That I loved. But, look, it's cool. I have, I'm also not judging any, but like, if that's your thing, if it's cathartic for you, great. Obviously, F Trump. I also, if it personally upset Trump, that's terrific. But, I don't care about this sort of stuff. It doesn't do anything for me. This did do something for me. This was Robert De Niro on Reliable Sources with Brian Stelter. Now, there's actually a kind of serious point to be made here for what it's worth. I mean, it's a serious point we've made plenty of times, but it's worth revisiting. And Brian Stelter getting upset, or I should say uptight, is funny. Let's check this out.
This guy should not be president, period.
And when you say that, folks on Fox come after you. I remember the Tonys.
Pause it.
Got
I have to say that. That I like. That just
contrast?
Folks on Fox, like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't like. Do we really even have time for this? Stop it.
I thought you were going to say the contrast in demeanors.
The contrast in well, I mean, this is like a.
It's not exactly Heat.
I mean, this isn't. This is a new movie. I mean, this is the beginning of a trailer of like he was a neurotic newscaster who followed boring media stories. He was an ex-con
somehow they like basically De Niro needs to. Somehow it's like De Niro has gotten out of jail and somehow has been like allowed to leave the mafia because he's like such a boss that they're just like, hey, Bobby, whatever his character is, you can leave. It's no problem. He has somehow scored an internship on CNN, probably through his son. His son is clean. His son is legit and wants his dad to get legit in the last phase of his career. He's interning on reliable sources. Stelter's a total wuss bag and like can't get the girl he wants or something. So Stelter needs to teach De Niro the news business to meet his parole requirements, and De Niro needs to teach Stelter how to be a man. I just gave you the script. All right.
I'd watch the hell out of that.
That sounds like a great movie. All right, let's watch this.
This guy should not be president, period.
And when you say that, folks on Fox come after you. I remember the Tonys when he got up there and cursed. A lot of criticism of you.
Fuck him.
Okay, well, this is cable,
Sorry.
so it's not an FCC violation, but it is still a Sunday morning.
Well,
I do wonder why you choose to go that way.
Let me say something.
Why do you choose to go that way?
We are at a moment in our life, in this country, where this guy is like a gangster. He's come along and he's said things, done things we say over and over again. This is terrible. We're in a terrible situation. We're in a terrible situation. And this guy just keeps going on and on and on without being stopped.
Let's fit in a break. Let's squeeze in a commercial. More with Robert De Niro in just a moment.
I love De Niro's just like, yeah, whatever, dude. But it's funny because like I thought the De Niro did something, I think it was before the election, that a bunch of people, like I remember the most embarrassing thing, one of the more embarrassing things I've ever seen in my life was David Axelrod quote tweeting it and being like, he's in New York, you got a problem with that? It was just like, it was so embarrassing that you needed to like put your phone down and go outside, take a walk and try to forget that you saw that. But in that interview, I actually think that's very revealing because you know what, for what it's worth, whatever else you want to say about Robert De Niro, that's coming from the right place. We have a disgusting, dangerous president. He hasn't been held in check. He's grotesque. He just keeps going and going, going. All of this is 100% true. And you're uptight because I used a boo-boo word. Whatever, dude.
Do we know who De Niro does support? That kind of colors it for me a little bit.
That would color it for me too. But my guess would be is that he's probably... my guess is he's like a guy who's probably not, he's like going to Taylor Swift it. He probably won't even endorse until after the primaries over.
De Niro
and
joined
only
DSA.
to mess with Katy Perry.
Yes. De Niro joined DSA. That would be awesome.
I feel like Danny DeVito is closer to doing that, but maybe he could get him on board.
I feel like isn't Danny DeVito in DSA?
Oh, what?
I mean, I could be. I'm not trying to spread. I just know that Danny DeVito.
He should join.
Danny DeVito's a legit. Danny DeVito is more close to like Danny Glover. Like these are like serious. Like, and yeah. All right. Sam loves to read ads. Let him bathe you in one. 3. Jesus
Folks,
Christ.
it doesn't matter if you're having barbecue in your backyard. God, I would love to have a backyard. Backyard, you have like movie nights out there. You can set up. I saw a guy walking in my neighborhood. Somebody had projected a TV onto the wall next door, and they were sitting out like on. They had a deck. Imagine having beautiful Joybird outdoor furniture. Joybird has it all. Well, they got that one of a kind furniture that you can actually craft to your own unique taste. You want a sofa in aquatic blue or indigo? A love seat in the hottest red? If you can dream it, Joybird can make it a reality. They got rich buttery leather to the plushest velvet you've ever felt. You can find the fabric, the texture, the color that's right for you. Joybird even offers a range of kid and pet-friendly upholstery options that stand the test of time. Plus, they have free personal design consultants. They help you nail down your perfect design. And they get a 365-day home trial. So if you don't like your couch after 30 days of sitting on it, you can return it. And you can return it completely free within 2 weeks of delivery. I've said this before, but we got a Joybird store around the corner, and I'll go in there and check and just sort of daydream. See how Joybird can help you design your dream space and make your furniture at your own. Joybird.com/majority25. That's joybird.com/majority25 to create the furniture that brings you joy today. Joybird.com/majority25. And you get 25% off your first order by using the code majority25. Again, joybird.com/majority25. Check it out. You're going to love this stuff. And you can make it your own. That's what's amazing about it. Most of these places are pretty rigid. Joybird, you develop your own furniture. I love it. Also, today's show supported by Cariuma. What they do is they marry old school designs with new school ethics. Check these bad boys out. This reminds me of when I was not just a kid, but like a young man. They want your shoes that you wear to be made responsibly, feel crazy comfortable, and provide effortless style. Like these are, the classic high top sneaks. I got mine in black leather, but they had brown leather. They got canvas, and they make their sneakers by hand with premium natural materials. Their canvas made from cotton sourced via fair trade initiatives. The cleaner premium leather, which is made with water that's been reused and treated with zero chemical waste output. Their outsole is even made of natural raw rubber. Plus, their shipping footprint balance is zero. Offsets, which is amazing considering they ship worldwide and here in the U.S. And they even have express shipping and can deliver your shoes in just 2 to 3 business days. If for any reason they don't fit perfectly, you can return them free of charge. These things are incredibly comfortable, super stylish, which is important because I'm trying to up my look. And like I say, they're made responsibly. Plus, these are much more. They give you much more support. Look at these. Look at this. The sole in here is sweet. I love these sneakers. They become my go-to. And I have a problem. Those are actually nice. Right? We can't. You got. He can't hear Michael, but he's saying he's giving me. Actually,
I'm giving you the First of all, you should wear those. They look cool, and I've got a little bit of sneakerhead credibility. I even have a sneaker coffee table book in my apartment. And
is that from the?
It's called "Where Did You Get Those?" It's about New York's sneaker culture from the 70s to the 90s.
There was an exhibit at the.
Well, it came out well before the exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. My point is, those look great. You should wear them.
I do wear them, but I have this dilemma now, where I've never felt this with sneakers before. I don't want to get them dirty, so I'm hesitant to wear them on some level.
There you go. What you got to do is you got to get 2 pairs. You got to get your fresh to death pair that you only wear for special occasions, and your other pair that you let get scuffed a little.
Boom, I'll do it. And for a limited time, our listeners can get exclusive 15% off your first pair of Cariuma sneakers. Go to cariuma.com/majority to get 15% off. That's cariuma.com/majority for 15% off today. Get your 2 pairs. Right? What did you call them?
You get your fresh to death pair.
Yeah.
And then you get your pair that you can scuff up. Which, by the way, if you do it right, and those shoes look cool enough, you can scuff them up with character. They're still going to look really good.
I love it. And lastly, this program is sponsored by the outfit that allows me to have such high-quality dental hygiene. What's the best way to ease back into a post-summer routine? Simplify the morning and the evenings with an electric toothbrush from Quip. Quip has timed sonic vibrations that give you an effective clean, but gentle on your sensitive gums in 2 minutes, twice a day. It times it for you. You gotta take care of your gums, folks. This is where all the problems happen. And it has a multi-use cover that works as a stand and mounts to mirrors. Put your brush front and center. You never forget to do it. It's super convenient to do it because this is not one of those bulky electric toothbrushes that are falling all over the place, drop into the garbage by your pedestal sink. It's not like that. The design is incredible. It's lightweight. It's compact. You can also bring it with you on an overnight, on a trip. Get an extra one, leave it at a friend's house. Brush heads are automatically delivered on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5. It makes it super easy. Send you also toothpaste. The whole point of brushing teeth, you got to make it a habit. You got to do it all the time. So you got to make it easy and you got to make it effective. Boom, Quip. That's why I love it. And it looks cool.
They do.
And I got to say, like every cool person I've ever met, the deal that, you know, when, I don't want to get too explicit, but, you know, we walk into someone's bathroom and you see a Quip, boom, I know this is going to work out. That's why I love Quip. And it's perfect for getting back into a routine. I told you, my sister, right? I mentioned that. I got a compliment from her dentist because I got her a Quip. Starts at just $25. If you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you can get your first refill pack free. That's your first refill pack free at GetQuip, GetQuip.com/majority. Back to Michael.
Thank you, Sam. I wonder if Thom Hartmann uses Quip. But we do know that Thom Hartmann is a great broadcaster, historian, progressive. Sam just recorded this interview a couple days ago. It's fresh. It's about Tom's new book, A Hidden History of the Supreme Court and Betrayal of America. Sounds about right. All right, back to you, Sam.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome back to the program the #1 talk radio, a liberal talk radio host, a progressive talk radio host in the country, author of multiple best-selling, New York Times best-selling books, and a personal favorite of mine, and in many respects, a teacher of mine. Thom Hartmann, welcome to the program.
I've been learning from you, Sam, too, for years.
That's very sweet of you to say, Tom.
And I'm honored to have you as a friend and as a colleague.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And you have you've basically started a series of books on the hidden history, basically hidden history pamphlets, and you've come out one that is for October of this year, which frankly couldn't be more timely as we enter into the 2020 election and in trying to get a sense of, you know, what's at stake here. And in some respects, and we should talk about this too, that, you know, maybe we may be a little bit late in terms of the stakes. And your book provides perhaps a corrective for that, but that is you have a hidden history of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. I want to go through it, obviously, because you provide an extensive history, obviously, of the Supreme Court. But in what respect do you perceive it as having, when we look at the totality of the history of the Supreme Court, in what respect does it betray America?
Well, there's three kind of storylines that go through the book. The first is how the Supreme Court rose from being basically the court of last resort, a necessary and important function of government, to being the most powerful of the three branches of government. And they did that by seizing a power that was never granted them in the Constitution, and that most of the founders didn't think they had until they asserted it in 1803, and President Thomas Jefferson totally freaked out. The second fascinating piece of this that involves the betrayal of America is how the Constitution explicitly says in Article 3, Section 2, that the Supreme Court not only is to be regulated by Congress, and that would be as to how many members it has, and, you know, when they meet and what their budget is and where they meet and all that kind of stuff, but also that Congress can pass legislation and put specific exemptions into that legislation on which the Supreme Court may not rule. So Congress can pass a law. This is called jurisdiction stripping or court stripping. It has happened in our history. Congress can pass a law, and they can build into that law a sentence that simply says the Supreme Court may not rule on the constitutionality of this. And Congress has failed in that regard in a big way. And then the third is the politicization of the court, which really started in a big way with the Nixon administration. In 71, the Powell memo, and then in 72, Nixon puts Lewis Powell on the court, and then 76 and 78 in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, and then the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, which Lewis Powell authored. The court rules in 76 that if a billionaire wants to own a politician or throw hundreds of millions of dollars into a political campaign or for lobbying, that cannot be regulated by the government. It overturned a whole bunch of good government laws that were passed literally from 1907 right up through right after the Nixon bribery scandals. And then in 78, in the First National Bank case, they applied that same logic to corporations, and then tied it all together in a neat little bow in 2010 with Citizens United. So we've got, and so as the court acquired this power, and as it gave this power to wealthy people and corporations, the Republican Party, in large part, in part because of their shock over the 1954 Brown versus Board decision and the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, decided that they were going to get control of the friggin' Supreme Court. We're going to take this thing back. And they did it by rigging presidential elections. And in the book, I document how Richard Nixon committed treason to become president in 68 by blowing up Lyndon Johnson's peace deal with South Vietnam. Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader at that time, acknowledged it was treason. We didn't hear the tapes of this until 50 years after LBJ died, but they're out there now. How Ronald Reagan committed treason in 1980 to become president, cutting a deal. We now have the testimony of the then president of Iran, who said that the Reagan campaign approached them and said, if you guys will hold on to the hostages until November, until the elections. Actually, they held on to them until January. They released them to the second, the minute that Ronald Reagan put his hand on the Bible to be sworn in. If you guys will hang on to the hostages, so Carter is humiliated, we'll make sure that you get all the spare parts and weaponry that you need, because they were, they had an all-American military infrastructure, and the Shah had just been overthrown. And then how George W. Bush, his daddy, had several friends on the court, and they went to bat for George, stopping the recount in Florida in 2000, a recount that when the New York Times actually did it a year later, they found, sure enough, Al Gore actually won Florida. And then, the failure of the court to be involved in anything having to do with Russia involvement now, and the corruption of the court by Mitch McConnell holding off on Barack Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland for almost a whole year. This is unprecedented, unconstitutional, and frankly, I think criminal. But the court was just fine with that. So the court has become essentially, as Sheldon Whitehouse pointed out in an op-ed in last week's Washington Post, an arm of the GOP.
And we should say, just that Whitehouse and a couple other senators, that letter, an op-ed that he wrote, and I think they wrote a letter as well to the Supreme Court with about 4 or 5 other senators sign off. It was in the context of Second Amendment cases, but it was, as far as these things go, almost a threat, right? This is a precursor, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because I think there is a very, very strong movement, and your book is part of sort of the intellectual case that is being developed now, so that lawmakers are compelled to do something in the event that Democrats have the ability to do something, after the 2020 election. But let's go back to 1803 rather, and talk about how the court changed here. And I have to say this too, that one of the things I think that is clear is that a lot of what we're seeing with the court today is it's reverting to where it has traditionally been, right? Like the court has always been, certainly like in the lead up to the Civil War, and really in a dramatic fashion, I think, during Reconstruction and then throughout Jim Crow, the court really functions, and we could talk about the sort of the smaller aspects of the court, I mean, or the cases that deal with different aspects of society, but from a structural standpoint, the court has been has intervened to make sure that it allowed the scales to be tipped in favor of powerful interests. When I'm talking about like Jim Crow and whatnot, a lot of that vote suppression, Congress may have opened the door on some level with it, with the limitations it put on the 13th Amendment, but the court certainly sort of like busted that door open and said, yes, any way you can come up with disenfranchising black voters or frankly, and poor voters, go for it. And because the court was always edifying power, largely. And then, there was we had, 30 years, I think, of the court in the mid 20th century where that was reversed for a time. But
basically the Warren Court,
yes.
Which is why the John Birch Society, with Fred Koch's money, had billboards all across America that said impeach Earl Warren throughout the 50s and 60s, late 50s and throughout the 60s.
All right, well, let's go back to 1803. So when we talk about the court, just explain to us what was when the court was contemplated. And, I mean, I think there's only so much we can do, but it's important for people to understand the point of this. What was the court contemplated as being, and then what was it in 1803 that shifted its role, and how did that happen?
Well, originally, the Supreme Court was set up to be basically the court of last resort. You had to have a place where the buck finally stopped. So, if your dog ate my chicken and one of us sued the other, and one of us wins and then the other one appeals it, and it goes back and forth, and eventually it gets to, it keeps going up and up and up the food chain of the courts. It has to stop somewhere, and that was the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court was considered the appellate court, the final appellate court, the court of final appeals. In addition to being the court that would adjudicate arguments between the states or between the United States and other countries. Those were the basic three functions of the Supreme Court. And as Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist number 81, this is in June of 1788, he said, the authority of the Supreme Court of the United States, which is to be a separate and independent body, the power of construing the laws. Well, actually, let me jump to the next sentence. In the first place, there is not a syllable. This is Alexander Hamilton. In the first place, there is not a syllable in the plan under consideration which directly empowers the national courts to construe the laws according to the spirit of the Constitution, or which gives them any greater latitude in this respect than may be claimed by the courts of every state. In other words, the Supreme Court, in Hamilton's mind, and this is how it was sold to people in the Federalist Papers and how it's written in the Constitution, the Supreme Court is the final court of appeals, but doesn't have the power to say this is or is not constitutional, does not have the power to strike down laws, a process that's referred to as judicial review or judicial supremacy. And in fact, the part of the Constitution that specifically authorizes the Supreme Court, Article 3, Section 2, reads very simply, in all cases affecting ambassadors, this is that other area where the court has original jurisdiction. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, in other words, the final appeals court, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions, and the word exceptions is capitalized, and under such regulations, and that word is capitalized, as the Congress shall make. So the court, was basically the dogs and chickens court. And in 1803, there was a case that had to do with the Judiciary Act of 1797 that, without going into a whole lot of detail, basically in this case, the court struck down a law which had been passed by Congress and signed by President Adams or President Jefferson or Washington, whichever it was. In any case, it was Washington. It was a Judiciary Act 17. I don't have the year. Anyhow, Sam, the court struck this law down. And Thomas Jefferson went absolutely nuts. He wrote, and I'll just give you a couple of quotes. These are in the book. The opinion which gives to the judges the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislative and executive also in their spheres, would make the judiciary a despotic branch. If this Marbury decision be sound, then indeed is our Constitution a complete felo de se, which is Latin for a suicide pact. The Constitution on this hypothesis is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary. I mean, he was just outraged. But the problem he had was that he had won the case, and so he couldn't appeal his own victory. But there was such an explosion in 1803 around the Marbury case that John Marshall, who was probably the longest serving Chief Justice in history, or one of them, never again used judicial review in a consequential way. And in fact, the court just totally stayed away from this all the way up until 1856, the second time that they used judicial review for a consequential decision. And that was when Chief Justice Roger Taney decided that he would once and for all resolve the slavery issue in the Dred Scott decision, which of course caused the Civil War, led to the Civil War, exacerbated the power, the movement toward the Civil War. So historically, the court did not decide which laws were constitutional and which weren't. Historically, the court did not strike down laws, and historically, the court did not write laws. And with those two exceptions, in the first 80 years of the existence of this country, the court never did any of those things. They started aggressively doing that sort of thing in the 1880s after the failure of Reconstruction, and picked up some steam with the Lochner Court in the 1920s, slowed down in the 1930s, and then went nuts again with the Reagan administration.
And we should say, I think the partly responsible for the failure of Reconstruction, frankly, by okaying these sort of restrictions on voting. But getting back to Article 3, Section 2, has there ever been? And so the court asserts itself and takes essentially rights, if you will, or duties that are not enumerated or granted to it by the Constitution. Is there ever a time where Congress says, hey, wait a second, under Section 2, we have the ability, and maybe this is what you're talking about in terms of like removing jurisdiction, but we have the ability to limit the Supreme Court shall have the appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as Congress shall make. Theoretically, Congress could say, you don't have the ability to conceptualize the Second Amendment. You don't have the ability to could Congress
to strike down the Civil Rights Act? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, no, wait a second. That's two different things. Can Congress say you don't have the ability to interpret the Second Amendment? It seems to me they're on stronger footing to say you don't have the ability to, if we have if we have ratified the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. You can't. It's one thing for them to say you can't interpret the Constitution. It's another thing for them to say you can't overturn our laws, particularly if it's not, on like an explicit constitutional grounds.
Right.
I guess maybe that was their argument with Section 5, that somehow it was like a 14th Amendment. That's ironic.
It was a constitutional argument that they made when they stripped the Voting Rights Act. And it's always a constitutional argument. Sometimes they really have to shoehorn it in, but they recognize that that's the one area where they have authority, or have acquired or taken authority. But Phyllis Schlafly and I used to talk about this a lot on the air. She wrote a book called The Supremes about this. And she told me on the air on several occasions that back when Tom Daschle was the head of the Senate, that in one of the farm bills, he had included a court stripping provision, and I think it had to do with ethanol, basically saying that the Supreme Court could not challenge this law. Now, I looked for that when I was writing this book and was unable to find it, but I kind of gave up in frustration after going through, hundreds and hundreds of pages of laws. But where it gets real interesting is in the early 1980s, the Reagan administration wanted to overturn two Supreme Court decisions. The first was the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision that outlawed segregation and overturned the 1898 separate but equal Plessy versus Ferguson decision.
I imagine John Roberts was in the DOJ working on that.
Well, we'll get to that in just a second. And then secondly, they wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision. So Ed Meese hired this young lawyer to come into the Reagan White House and gave him the singular assignment to spend a year figuring out how, without a constitutional amendment, which is typically how we've overturned Supreme Court decisions, without a constitutional amendment, could an entirely Republican House, Senate, and White House overturn these two decisions. And this young lawyer worked on this, and he came up with a rather substantial document. See, I've got it in my hands here. See how many pages it is. It's like 50. It's 26 pages. He wrote this incredible 26-page draft in which he starts literally with the founders and the Federalist Papers and the Constitution, and ends at the present moment, and says, yes, under Article 3, Section 2, Congress can easily pass a law which says that the Supreme Court may not review it. And Congress could simply pass a law saying that, segregated schools are just fine in the United States and that women do not have the power to decide whether or not to have an abortion. And that report kind of got buried. I don't think anybody's ever seen it before. I was amazed when I came across it. And it was written by John Roberts himself, who was working in the DOJ at that time, as you point out. And he's now the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, the Reagan administration never did that. I mean, one of the things that Roberts points out in his report is that doing this will create, it'll be like a nuclear bomb going off in D.C., politically speaking. And, it'll provoke a constitutional crisis because no doubt the court will say, no, you can't do that. And the legislature will say, yes, I can. And there is no mechanism for resolving a dispute between the court and the other two branches. The court has claimed that they have primacy, that they have the final say in all matters. And nobody knows how that would shake out. But that's the last chapter of my book. It's titled in case of emergency break glass. Right. It's like, if all else fails, we can use John Roberts' suggestion to get around the court. Now, there's other things that are probably much less problematic, like doing what FDR tried to do in 1937, which is increase the size of the court, which has been done a number of times over the years, both increase and decrease, actually. When Andrew Johnson became president, a member of the Supreme Court died in the first few months after he became president, and he was going to appoint a new member. And Congress, which hated Johnson, I mean, keep in mind, they tried to impeach him, and They came within one vote of doing it in the Senate. Congress got together, and they passed a law saying that the number of members of the Supreme Court would go from 7, which is where it was then, down to 6. And so Johnson couldn't appoint a new Supreme Court justice. And that lasted until Johnson left office. And as soon as he left office and the next president was installed, Congress came back and added a 7th person to the Supreme Court, and that person was appointed by the next president. I'm sorry, I don't remember who followed Johnson, but whoever it was, that's what happened. And I think it might have been Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, and so let's talk about this. I mean, and folks should read this to sort of follow the court, which largely, again, but for the Warren Court era, has been on the side of corporate power, of established power. That may have been corporate power, moneyed power. I mean, throughout our history. I mean, like we say, the Dred Scott probably was one of the things that lit a match on the Civil War, insofar as it brought about, to head a sort of argument between the North and the South as to slavery and the expansion of slavery, and what the federal government, what rights the federal government had in regards to this, and then so as people read that, let's talk about potential solutions. Like, as you know, I think largely this a book like this creates starts to set the table for people to see that we have a structural problem with the Supreme Court. I know you go through this notion, and you just talked about the number of justices on the court. Let's talk about term limits, and I'm curious from your perspective. A, what is the best result if you could snap your fingers? And then B, what is the best approach to get to that result, presuming that you don't have the ability to snap your fingers and create this type of reform?
Right. Well, in a way, what Franklin Roosevelt was proposing in 1937 was term limits. He didn't suggest that anybody be removed from the court. The Constitution quite clearly says that during times of good behavior, which might be an interesting exception with regard to Justice Beer Bong Weenie Waiver. But in any case, during times of good behavior, federal judges, whether it's the Supreme Court or any other federal judge, have lifetime appointments. It's just period. So the question isn't how do you get somebody off the Supreme Court by retiring them. The question is how do you move them into some other federal judiciary position? And what Franklin Roosevelt suggested was that all the justices who were over 70 years old, which at that time was five of them, would end up with one vote. They would all become justices emeritus. Collectively, they would have one vote, and that new justices would be brought into the court to make up the missing 4 votes. And so that's one way to do it. They're still on the court. They just have their roles changed. They've been regulated by Congress. And that was presumably entirely constitutional. The way that is being talked about more frequently these days, by progressive activists and Democratic politicians, is saying that after a certain number of years on the court, a justice moves off the Supreme Court and back into the federal bench. In other words, they would go back, say they came out of the Ninth Circuit and went to the Supreme Court, they'd go back to the Ninth Circuit. Typically, it's the D.C. Circuit or the First Circuit. But, wherever, they'd go back home where they were, but they're still a federal judge and they still have a job for life. And that you would try to do this in a way that the justices are retired in a staggered fashion, so that every president every 4-year term of a presidency has an opportunity to appoint 1 or 2 Supreme Court justices guaranteed, assuming, and that it only becomes a larger number than that if somebody dies or retires untimely. All of those are viable, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt Ford in the New Republic had a scheme that, and I've heard other schemes that involved that notion of maintaining their lifetime appointments to the judiciary, just rotating them through different places in the judiciary between the appellate level and the Supreme Court itself. What is it about when we hear FDR's court packing? There's a lot of people who talk about it as if it was apocalyptic and it was it was an affront on democracy, and that it was very dangerous. There's definitely that sort of notion out there that that's such a radical idea. Where does that come from?
That comes out of the Republican Party. That is ahistoric. It doesn't comport with the actual historical record. Although, I think I've told you this story back when I first moved to Washington, D.C. years and years ago, or, started doing our show from D.C. This is 15 years ago or 13 years ago, something like that. I was given a tour of one of the conservative think tanks, and I was down in their basement, and there was this large room with maybe 20, 30 people sitting at computers. And as I was walking around, and young people working on computers, and as I was walking around, pretty much all of them had Wikipedia up, and they were editing Wikipedia pages. just a lickety split. And it's amazing to me in writing these books as I'm doing research. The first one was on guns. This one's on the Supreme Court. The one coming out in the spring is on the war on voting. The one I'm wrapping up right now is on monopoly. How often I find just naked right-wing bias in Wikipedia entries, whether it has to do with the Great Depression, or Smoot-Hawley, or the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, or anything else. The simple fact is that FDR was pushing through a bunch of progressive reforms in his first term, from 1933 to 1930 to January or to March, January of 37, and the Supreme Court kept knocking them down. He passed a law that said child labor was illegal. The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. He created the American Reconstruction Agency. I forget the name of it, AR something, and which included long-term unemployment insurance and the WPA programs like this that provided long-term jobs to people. The Supreme Court knocked them down. And over and over again, the Supreme Court was knocking these cases down. And in 37, the Supreme Court was set to hear Social Security. And so America was just absolutely on edge. The majority of Americans loved Franklin Roosevelt. He was overwhelmingly popular. And he had a strong Democratic House and Senate. But the Republicans were hysterical. They were convinced that Social Security was socialism, that we had started down the road to communism, that we were on our way to becoming the Soviet Union, that long-term unemployment insurance, that child labor laws, all of these things were proof that FDR was a communist. And so FDR, realizing that Social Security was on the line, and not just Social Security, also the Wagner Act was going to be decided in the court term of 37, which was the National Labor Relations Act, which made it legal to have a labor union. And so the stakes were like really, really high. And so FDR, knowing that the court in all probability would strike these things down, started doing a sales pitch for expanding the number of members of the court. And the blowback from the Republicans was absolute screaming hysteria. But when you go back and actually read histories of the time, and I quote them rather extensively in my book, you find that the majority of the public actually supported FDR, and he could have done it. The thing that pulled the plug on it, the reason he didn't do it, is that two of the justices, there were four justices that voted against him on every single case, and they could usually get a fifth one to come along. They refer to themselves as the Four Horsemen. The two of these justices changed their mind in one of the critical decisions in 37, right in the middle of FDR trying to sell his court packing scheme. And it turns out, and this was something I found in some correspondence that Frances Perkins had with her sister, it turns out that Frances Perkins had a conversation with this guy's wife, and it was probably the thing that turned him. Wow. And so once that happened, the court started agreeing with FDR. They agreed with him on Social Security. They agreed with him on labor unions. And he was left with no political constituency anymore, right? It was no longer an emergency. Right. And so he abandoned his court packing scheme. He was not defeated. The way that if you read it on Wikipedia or in some of this revisionist right-wing BS, what you hear is that, the Republicans successfully fought him back. No, not the case.
Well, I don't hold out a lot of hope for someone convincing Ginny Thomas to impact the future court decisions. So we may be looking at, and so from a strategic standpoint, what do you think you're advising President Sanders or President Warren?
God willing.
God willing. What do you advise them? Let's just assume that they have the Senate too. I mean, from a strategic standpoint, do you go for expansion of the court, or do you say, I'm going to threaten expansion of the court to get term limits, or the Congress should vote to narrow the jurisdiction the Supreme Court has on certain issues? What do you choose?
In 37, public opinion polling was not as well developed as it is now, but there were a number of ways to measure public opinion. And just 20 years earlier, when the Lochner court was, striking things down, or taking right-wing positions, they were still viewed as a credible and legitimate institution. By 1937, the majority of Americans viewed the Supreme Court, as a political body. And the Warren Court kind of pulled that back, and really the 37, 38, going forward court, the Supreme Court kind of regained their own credibility over the years. But I think we're at that point again, where the majority of people see the court as a political agent. And so as such, my advice would be do all of the above. Propose legislation that includes court stripping provisions. Go after the court with proposed term limits. Propose expanding the court. I would, assuming that and this is a huge assumption, as you know, Sam, assuming that in the election of 2020, that not only do we get the White House, but that we get a substantial majority in the House and Senate. Right. And if that's the case, then I would go for not just the cosmetic changes and not just the fight of the day. I would go for major, permanent, long-term structural change.
Well, like you said, God willing. Thom Hartmann, It is always a pleasure. We will put a link to the hidden history of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America at majority.fm. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Thom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. I always enjoy talking with you, and I really appreciate your having me on.
Welcome back. Michael Brooks here. We're going to go to the fun half and go over a bunch of sound, take some calls, take some IMs. You know how we do. Let me first start by saying become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this whole thing happens. Just coffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate.
Don't hear much about the chocolate, actually.
Yeah, he used to say that. Am I wrong?
He does say that, but this is the first time I've actually listened to it, and I've never had any coffee from them.
Well, you haven't had chocolate from them.
Or chocolate, sorry, yeah.
We drink the coffee. Their coffee fuels the operation.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I haven't had the chocolate. I wonder what that's
like.
Treat boy Matt will investigate the chocolate.
Let's do it. I like it. Folks, go check out the Michael Brooks Show today. Tomorrow, big show. Anna Kasparian joins us to get into the details of why we need single-payer healthcare, housing for all, and she makes the strong case for impeaching the MFer. I'm giving you a guide of all of the political factions inside Palestine and Israel, as well as this incredible speech at the UN General Assembly by the Prime Minister of Barbados, a whole bunch of other stuff. This Sunday, an illicit history of counter-hegemony and the new partnership between the state of California and China on climate change. Patreon.com/TMBS. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. And grab your tickets today, November 23rd. Very excited. Live show in Philadelphia with Krystal Ball, Emma Vigeland, Artesia Balthrop, and two other quick things I'll just let everybody know. I was on with Krystal Ball this morning on The Hill. You can go check that out. And just had a piece co-published with Ben Burgess and the Jacobin on how Bernie could answer the disingenuous question on Venezuela by actually giving a really broad answer on U.S. interventionism in Latin America that connects his really brave and smart and correct stances that he's taking on foreign policy with a more holistic answer as to why. Like, why can't Venezuela be like Sweden? I wonder. Go check the piece out. All right, Jamie, what's cooking?
This week on the Antifada, we speak with Nadja Guyot, an organizer from No New Jails, NYC, about what prison abolitionism means in theory and in practice, and the current ongoing campaign to close Rikers and not replace it with anything, instead reinvesting the money in communities and going through various decarceration measures. And I'm really excited about that. Also, we have a live show coming up October 12th at Littlefield here in Brooklyn.
What part of Brooklyn is Littlefield in?
It is in just even closer to the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal.
Got it.
Heartland of America.
Yes. That's a cool
Gowanus, Brooklyn, USA.
Cool venue.
And we are doing this show with our Goth Socialist sister show, Pod Damn America. That's Jake Flores, Alex Patak, and Anders Lee. We also have some really amazing, good-ass guests, including Virgil Texas, Matt Chrisman, Simone Norman, Leslie Lee III, and Comrade Barbie. So, and that last one, by the way, is a communist drag queen.
Oh, okay. It's not Brendan's alter ego.
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, you never know.
You have to come to the show to see if you recognize Comrade Barbie.
All right, very dope.
So, yeah, get your tickets.
Hi, it's me. I'm Comrade Bobby. It's Sam.
For Literary Hangover, I released on the weekend the first time I've done a book solo. I did Hobbamock, A Tale of Early Times by Lydia Maria Child.
Who Cornell West
has
said we must read.
Cornell West says we must uplift her. She was a early feminist and abolitionist. And I mean, she's great. She also wrote like the Frugal Housewife's Guide to Living. It's some book like that, which was a sort of more every person that like basically how you deal with poverty and like getting by, and not just, and people thought it was tasteless because it's like you shouldn't talk about that sort of thing so much.
Right, yeah.
Like women shouldn't have to like you shouldn't acknowledge that you deal with poverty. So she was very, very good a role model. I talk about her first book, which she wrote when she was like 22, and it was basically a response to James Fenimore Cooper's The Pioneers, and maybe a little bit more interesting, but people can be the judge of that. So check that out, Hobbamock.
Fascinating. All right, folks, we will see you on the Fun Half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Grandpa.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome to the Fun Half, everybody. Greetings to all sentient beings listening. Let's see. Bumper sticker update, this is from Colorado guy. Bumper sticker update Colorado edition. I drive hundreds of miles every week, and the vast majority of political bumper stickers I see here are Bernie, followed next by Trump. I've actually seen one for Ben Carson. Let's not talk about that, though. Lula Livre, and much love to everyone. I like that. Just still keeping it in the game. Water boat from Kashmir. A lot happening in Kashmir. Soldiers are forcing multiple people out of their homes so they can move, or forcing them to rent out portions of their homes. Trust me, they will not see this money for this, and that's not a big deal for Kashmiris anyway. In the meantime, continued destruction of food rations. Winter's effing cold in the Himalayas, and roads get blocked off. They did the same thing in the winter of 1990, and literally thousands of families starved to death, except they're doing it on a bigger scale now. So much is happening, it's hard to explain. All I want to say is that this is turning much more and more into Bosnia every day, but on a much bigger scale. I think that there is, I've been covering Kashmir to some extent, and also what Indonesia is doing to West Papua, which I apologize on my pronunciation, but you have these provinces that have always been, because they're primarily minority, they have, at least in the Indonesia and West Papua case, they have they have gold, they have huge natural resource assets. There's an economic dimension to Kashmir that I think people need to think about much more closely, which is that basically if you socially cleanse Kashmir, you open up a big real estate investment and tourism market. I mean, this is supposedly, and I believe it visually, I haven't had the privilege of visiting, one of the most beautiful places on earth. And you're talking about even things like skiing and, there's a lot of opportunity to make a lot of money there. So you can almost compare, there's a Bosnia dimension, there's a China and Tibet dimension, there's a U.S. in Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands or Guam dimension. When you tear up the at least partial autonomy that this place had. I mean, it still already was literally the most militarized place on the planet in the sense of, I think, highest proportion of military troop presence relative to population. And then, of course, you have China doing what they're doing to the Uyghurs. And I think in some ways, I was just thinking when you talked about people getting pushed out of their homes like that, I mean, Israel is the precursor of so many things. There's so many stories about Palestinians getting kicked out of their homes for Israeli occupations and operations, and the terror and horrifying consequences of that, and having a home gutted and destroyed by IDF soldiers, and then, oh yeah, fill out this form, we'll compensate you for the damage. Yeah, please. So,
hearing like food storage or food stores are getting destroyed, that's like basically a watchword for genocide. It's
absolute. I mean, look, if you go back to the RSS Hindutva philosophy, which underpins Narendra Modi's politics, and again, not Hinduism, and people who back Narodi just as Modi, look, the rhetoric of identity and the disingenuous, dishonest readings of that language is weaponized. I mean, Bolsonaro is using the language of sovereignty to cover for burning the Amazon, and talking about Macron's colonial mindset. Everybody can play these games, and so we're definitely not talking about Hinduism or the Hindu political tradition in a whole, but there is a far right and literally fascistic in the sense that early RSS writers, which is the paramilitary organization that umbrellas this, including the BJP, which is the party that Modi is from, you have writers openly praising Hitler back in the day, right? Like, I'm talking literal fascistic. I'm not saying we could find a trend line. I'm saying, like, they said what Hitler did, we should learn from. They also wanted to learn from early Israel as well, because it's ethno-state politics and an imagined past. I mean, that's everywhere you find it. Saudi, Iran, Israel, Pakistan, the United States, Brazil, Hungary. That's Russia. I mean, Philippines. That's always the same dynamic, and it's no exception here. But you will hear, and it really parallels Israel, the talking points that Tulsi did a couple of weeks ago, where she talked about how it was complicated and how there wasn't women's rights in Kashmir and the gay rights situation was bad. This is all Israel stuff. This is all like, oh, we just had to dump a bunch of white phosphorus on Gaza because they don't have gay pride parades. So, there's very close parallels there between the situations and a very formalized partnership between Netanyahu and Modi. Here is Tulsi Gabbard, fresh off of backing off of Medicare for All. I guess talking about peace and the inherent dignity of all humans with Narendra Modi. This is an image. Yeah, this is just an image. I also just want to say really briefly on the healthcare tip. I'm gonna do more of this in the coming weeks, but I'm really starting to like nerd out on global healthcare systems. Like, how does France actually provide healthcare? How does the NHS do it? How does Canada do it? How does South Africa do it? How does Israel do it? How does Germany do it? And so on. And I just want to say that, like, some people say, and it is true, in France, as an example, private insurance exists. And a lot of studies basically show, I think, like, Britain is maybe 2 or 3 and France is number 1. Like, France has just like the gold standard in health systems. And I just wanted to be very clear, though, that anytime you hear somebody saying, like, using an example like France to say that there's another way of having like socialized medicine, which is what it is, other than Medicare for All in the United States, that sounds interesting. And that better be immediately followed up by a even more aggressive taxation scheme and investment into public health care, which France has. France has such expansive public health care that you don't even just forget free at the point of purchase and all the other things that any decent system would have. You're talking like people sent to families' homes to help with child care. You're talking about and even things that might be, and not to mention,
that's
of course,
like Napoleon from like the Republic of like hundreds of years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're talking about mental care, dental care, which a lot of candidates, including Warren, not clear on what she's offering. So, and the insurance companies that still exist are all nonprofit or mutuals. And mutuals literally means owned by the collective shareholders. So, like, if the 4 of us owned a health insurance company collectively, I would feel a lot more comfortable about how that would take care of our respective healths. So I just want to say, like, it's very, Warren, there's objective ambiguity, and she's good in the debates, and she's not good at all in other contexts, and Biden is overt in how bad he is, and Buttigieg and Harris are dishonest. But I think that, in my opinion, I think that when you start hearing people say that there's other systems that can achieve the same level of expansiveness, then what's your French plan to go up against the Sanders Canada plan? And I would be interested in hearing that, because that would even be way more systemic and involve bigger money and more offerings, more regulation, and a bigger government role. Because at the end of the day, even though those things still exist, there's huge public ownerships of hospitals. There's most government is controlling people's and taking care of people's health. And, there's doctors have autonomy, but that's a different thing. And that doesn't really get implicated by any of these bills as far as I understand them. So be very wary of people who might sort of point vaguely towards other models that they're not talking about. If the debate was between whether we want to model ourselves after the NHS or the French system, beautiful. But that is not where we are.
I've said this before, but with the French system, when I was there a year and a half ago, the person I was with got sick and had to spend an overnight in the hospital. And when we were done, they just waved us out of there. No, didn't have to sign anything, just nothing. Or I had to sign something, but like there was no bill at all.
Yeah, it's way, way better. I like it. I like that you're getting very granular on this. I feel like in the same way that Social Security is Sam's bailiwick, I feel like this could be the Michael Brooks bailiwick.
It would be I care about healthcare and I like going global, so that could be fun. I will try. I have a lot more to read.
It's like when libertarians mention the Singapore model.
Yeah, the Singapore model is not what they think it is. I mean, the Singapore model, like so many things, Singapore is like super aggressive government and public intervention. Like, I love when libertarians are like, I don't know, I would feel really uncomfortable with that. But, you know, in Singapore, where they just like deduct things from taxes.
It's almost like
it's like souped up ACA, and they use that as their model. Like
that libertarian chair that debated Sam. He's like, well, if you were smart about what you wanted to do, i.e., not let people die on the streets or go into medical debt for lack of health care, you would do what Singapore is doing. And Sam's like, is that what you want to do? It's like, no, I don't want to do anything.
Right. Precisely. I do want to do it. I think it's really interesting. And I also want to know, and this is stuff I don't know. So tell me if you guys know or anybody knows. Like, okay, the UK has the NHS, which is great. And to the extent there's problems, it is because of cuts. And I don't buy any waiting time arguments because, like, there's things people wait for. Right, like if you're about to die from, you know, a heart attack or a gunshot wound, you can die in the United States for something that could be preventable because you went to the wrong hospital. That will never happen in the United Kingdom. So okay, you have the United Kingdom, then you have France, and then you have, and then if you look at the list, like even the top ones, there starts to be like a slightly gradual decline, like Germany and Switzerland. It's great, but it's not as good as France or the UK. And then certainly Canada is really good, but not as good as those because it doesn't cover things like dental and stuff. And what I wonder is like I know in Germany there is like there's more of a role for private insurance if you want it. It's not, and my understanding is not quite as regulated as France. Basically, it seems to me that like the more there is an actual private insurance industry, the lower the health outcomes. And I wonder how long that. I mean, first of all, I'm just tapping into this, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'll keep reading it. This is like first run through. And then I wonder like how long it took a country to implement a national social system relative to how long a parasitic industry got to establish itself and eat up room in terms of political patronage. Because that's what happened in the US. Reason we don't have single payer, I mean, literally Harry Truman put that on the table. And some of the first PR influence fake news campaigns in the country were funded by the American Medical Association to terrify people about communism and healthcare.
It makes me so mad.
It's I mean, it's a wild history.
Check
but
out
it's so disgusting.
Check out Kimberly Phillips Fine, The Invisible Hands, I believe is the book on that, on the DuPonts and those sorts of names.
Yep.
Also, Tim Fast's book. I haven't read all of it yet, but it is very good so far. And he's a real wonk on Medicare for All.
What's
and
it called?
Any questions you have, he will probably answer them. Health Justice Now.
Dope. He's coming?
Yeah, we already had him on.
Oh, all right. I don't know how I missed that. All right. Sorry. The Shape of Pickles. I want to say I'm a paid subscriber to TMBS and the Antifada.
Hell yeah.
Well done. I would humbly suggest adding Literary Hangover. Well worth the investment. Also considering getting to the FinDom Pay Pig membership level of Antifada. Love you guys. Thanks for everything.
Oh, hell yeah.
Will you explain what that part means?
Oh, yeah. That's our ultra exclusive FinDom tier. I made it as a joke because I didn't think anyone was actually going to sign up. It's $100 a month. The benefits are you get nothing and you will like it, worm. And a couple people have actually signed up for it. And not to be financially dominated or sexually humiliated by us, but because they just support what we're doing. And then, of course, we give them the benefits because it would be really rude not to. But if you do want to be financially dominated by us and insulted, of course, we can do that too. But thank you so much for everyone who's done that. It's insanely amazing.
Awesome. You're calling from a 306 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? You're calling from a 306 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, Michael, it's Jeff from Regina, Saskatchewan calling. How are you doing today?
Jeff from, tell me where again?
Regina. Sorry, I know it's a bit of a.
I'm sorry.
Bit of an issue.
I did think you were pranking for a second. My bad.
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
what's on your mind? Sorry.
I was just calling in. So basically, what's happening is my union is right. Well, we're not striking yet. We're taking job action, and it's kind of an interesting case because it's the Unifor Union in Saskatchewan here. So they, they represent the. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Crown Corporation. It's basically a government-run company.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, in the job action we're taking, it's basically going to affect the gas company, the power company, telephone company, as well as some other larger organizations around the province. It's a kind of a, right now it's a job action, going to be affecting basically the entire province. And if nothing gets resolved by Friday, we're going to be moving straight into a full-on strike action starting next Monday, I believe.
It's amazing. How are you feeling?
Nervous, honestly. I mean, it's exhilarating at the same time, but it's obviously the idea of going forward without receiving paychecks and stuff like that. We do get some strike pay and things. It's scary, but at the same time, I mean, we're I don't know. I mean, trying to stick up for ourselves, trying to get a fair deal. So it's I don't know.
Have you done anything like this
before? Nice. Not really. No, I've only been with the company for a while, so this is going to be my first. This will be the first time doing something like this.
Awesome. Well, good luck. Will you please keep us posted?
Will do.
All right. Solidarity.
For what Canada does better than America, they seem to have a big problem with monopoly capital.
Definitely. Very big problem with monopoly capital. And they're, frankly, a petro state.
Right.
You're calling from a 248 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is Tyler from Great Falls, Montana.
Hey, Tyler, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Nothing much. I was calling because I've never followed a primary this early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what to make of all the polling and everything. It just kind of seemed to be all over the place.
Right. You know what I think? Here's what I think. I just watched a really fascinating interview with Adolph Reed, who I would say is definitely the type of person that agree, disagree. I happen to mostly agree. Not always, but mostly. He's just brilliant, right? Like, there's people like that. You just need to, actually, on the other end of the equation, somebody who I've always read, and maybe I actually don't talk about this as much, but I've been a reader, or at least I've read Bell Hooks, right? That's somebody that I don't necessarily that's not my framework for how I look at things and so on, but it's like, you got to read her. Like, this is a really important person, right? So anyways, strong plug for Adolph Reed. Class Notes is an incredible book. He just did a good interview with Current Affairs. And one of the things that he said that was more kind of really practical, I liked, where he said that when 2016, when he was campaigning for Bernie, he was telling the young people constantly, he talked about, and I'm forgetting I want to read more about this, but basically these 25 Soviet soldiers who held a building for weeks, they literally fought off thousands of Germans. And his point was we're doing something, we're in the middle of something. And when you're on the opposite side of what we do, frankly, and I think what we do is important too, you just keep knocking those doors and building those coalitions. And that really matters a lot. And then the arguments matter too. I mean, of course you need to debunk lies about, the candidate and so on. But I think to more answer your question specifically, please everybody else say your thoughts, obviously. I think the biggest thing that it measures is essentially viability going into Iowa. There's clear, if I was a Kamala Harris supporter, I would be getting pretty worried. And then I think there's other people that it's of course I want Bernie to be doing even better, but he's actually doing fine. If I was into Warren, I'd be excited. If I was into Biden, I would actually be he still leads. But I think that really what it measures is literally, are you in a position to win Iowa and or New Hampshire? And then when those results in, the whole equation changes. Like, I mean, let's just game this out. If Bernie wins Iowa and then he wins New Hampshire, then all of a sudden, I mean, would love to have a live cam in the green rooms at MSNBC. And, that's an incredible thing. If Warren wins Iowa and New Hampshire, there we go. Monster front runner. If Biden wins Iowa and New Hampshire, then everybody says, what was it? See, all this nonsense, but here we go. If it's a split, then it's a war of attrition. Then, if Warren wins Iowa and Bernie wins New Hampshire, then the Biden people will say, well, our Alamo is South Carolina. And then, chances are one of these other candidates will overperform in one of those states, and then they'll spin a whole media narrative out of it. So I think mostly what it's really just demonstrating right now is just basically, you want, like, again, obviously I'm a pure Sanders supporter. You want to be in a position where, even if he's behind the polls, he could definitely win Iowa, combined with the fact that their ground game, I think, is absolutely the best. And, you go in there being like, all right, this is viable. Let's see what happens. Let's knock on every single door and fight. If you're starting to get at like 2, 3, 4%, and that usually correlates with other things like not that much organic enthusiasm, not a broad donor base. So anyways, that's what I think it measures. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, personally, if the question is how you handle it mentally, I would say, don't get super invested into any of the narratives. Wait until people start voting.
I totally agree, and I would take the words of Adolph Reed seriously. Like, if you're invested in a particular candidate, go help that candidate.
Right.
Wait, what is what measure?
I mean,
Sorry.
I'm literally
how serious should
financially invested in Sanders.
So there you go, and that's great too. I mean, that's super important. But instead of worrying about every poll and whatever, if you have time, go knock on some doors. I mean, I literally don't. God, I'm terrified saying this. I sound exactly like Sam, but I am insanely dementedly busy, and I am still going to start to cut some time out of my schedule to do some either phone banking or door knocking very soon, because in my opinion, it's just, it's urgently important to elect Bernie Sanders. And that's a major part of the game that needs to happen. How much of an emotional effect should polls be having on people right now, I think, is the question.
Oh, man. I mean, should is different than what it's actually doing.
Right. Well,
like, I am annoyed that I care this much about an election at all this early before the election. It's a little unnerving for me, but guess what? I do. I can't help it. I see the numbers and I'm like, oh my God, is he going to do it? Like, you're just looking for any sign that something good is going to happen. But just, stay positive. I think really, based on all the information that I've taken in so far, I think Bernie could win it. And
definitely. I do want to emphasize that. He absolutely can win.
I think he can win. And
of course,
when we stay positive about that, I think it has a better effect on the mood, the turnout, the morale of people in the Bernie army than if one bad poll comes out and we're all like gloom and doom,
I totally agree with that. I just want to say too, without bringing up, the whole, look, everybody should be aggressive and clear for their candidate and debunk lies and bullshit and be clear about their policies. But the one thing that I do not like to see some people who support Bernie kind of doing is falling a little bit into kind of like noble loser discourse. And he's not. He's one of the three main candidates, raising an unbelievable amount of money, and literally like 1 million people conservatively have in some form, and because his coalition is serious working class coalition, have put themselves particularly on the line in a material way, whether or not that's a $20 campaign contribution or knocking on a door or making a call. And they're in it to win it. So, this isn't the time to just be like, he was the original band man, and then Warren wasn't as good, and she took his demo tape and got a Tower Records contract, which is true. Like, I make no bones about it. He is the superior candidate, and I won't. I've made quite clear I'm not indulging any false equivalency. But don't get into negativity. Don't get into resentment. Fight the good fight. and push it hard. And of course he could win. I mean, right now, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders can all definitely win. I mean, really, like it's candidates outside of that three are the people that really need to start having like Rube Goldberg scenarios as of now. Like, well, maybe if this happens, da 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 da. Those are the three candidates that as of now, it's like, yeah, they can win. So let's see how it shakes. And built in with Sanders, obviously, is that, uniform opposition from the press and the oligarchs. But that was baked into the cake from the beginning. I mean, as soon as Bernie Sanders became a real candidate in 2016, all of these, schmucks were like, oh, look at Bernie's joining the race. And then as soon as he became a real contender, they had, they had aneurysms. So, of course. Anyways,
I
thanks
think
for the call,
there are
man.
also
Appreciate
some
it.
people on the left who are kind of used to losing.
Yes.
And they're very comfortable with being sort of outsiders and throwing bombs from the outside. And they like when something comes along that could actually win, and we have been losing for a very long time, so it's understandable. But when someone comes along who could actually win, it's hard to change that mindset, especially if you've been in the trenches working, bashing away at things for years and seeing very little progress.
Can't.
We're starting to do snaps.
I'm doing a snap to that. I agree with that very strongly. And the distinction I would add to that is I think that there are some people who have been really beaten down and bludgeoned, but still really care and have the fight in them. And then I think that there are a number of institutions and certain there's certain things that are designed to be the Washington Generals, and that's all I'll say. And they're quite comfortable with losing because I don't really think they are designed to win.
Word.
Let's just do this. What could be more peak 2019 than a multi-billion-dollar trust fund baby lying about and smearing people who support Bernie Sanders? And I want to just be really clear about this.
It seems more 2016 to me.
I think history just goes and goes and goes.
It's a flat circle.
It's a flat circle.
It's a flat circle, folks.
Flat circle, folks. I mean, the fact that, the MSNBC bookers didn't even feel the need to like, hey, you know what? Maybe instead of in 2016, we'll still have people lie about and say grotesque things about Sanders, but they'll at least be like, I don't know, some, you could find any number of random mediocre pundits that will do this. It's like really like no. It absolutely has to be a gargantuan trust fund baby to do this. So 3 quick points before we play this clip, and then we'll elaborate them. But I want to just keep 3 things in mind. One is a campaign point. Yeah, this does matter because two are actually campaign related points. The third is more general. One, yes, it matters because, if some guy named like, Birdie Bro, Big D 32 with 45 followers says, hey, WFP are jerks, this will lead to days of recriminations and press coverage and smears and lies and exaggeration and a demand that the actual presidential campaign condemn this stuff, right? This is a nationally televised performance, by the way, and not an abnormality. We remember the cringe comment from skin crawl comment from a couple of months ago. So it needs to be dealt with and called out because the structural bias against Sanders is astounding. Now, the second point I would say is if we're going to play the game, and I think there needs to be limits on the game. As I've said, I've heard people who've, opposed Sanders or support Warren, certainly supported Clinton, who've said things that if I wanted to be in that sort of like, a certain kind of mindset, I could definitely say we're definitely anti-Semitic and certainly ageist and all of this other stuff. I don't think it's the responsibility of, the Warren or any campaign to condemn what random people on Twitter say. But I will say this. If a prominent supporter or at least sympathetic analyst to Sanders went on national television and said, Bernie Sanders is a great candidate. He's putting the most progressive politics on the table of any presidential candidate in the modern era, which are both objectively true statements. And if you don't support him, you're showing your anti-Jewish bias. By the way, that might be true. And I actually going to be talking about more of that, frankly, because that is definitely true in some cases. But if that was just your general comment, that would be obviously a huge overstatement and a smear of some people. And and Bernie Sanders' campaign, again, and this person could be, they would have no title. They would have already had to condemn this statement, 50 times. So I just want to say, if that's the game we're playing, Senator Warren's campaign should condemn and reject all of this stuff 100%. And 3, I'll be really short. The bias against Sanders is bigger than a bias against him, because you have the most overtly working class candidate in modern politics who represents a multiracial coalition. So what you do when you do that, and what you do when you say that, Nina Turner is getting paid to have sex with Bernie, as somebody with a platform said.
Jesus Christ.
Or you call, and granted, this is this now we're getting more on the level of lower level people, but, some of the things that have been said about Cornel West, Breonna Joy Gray, Nina Turner, and others, not only are people revealing, obviously, all of their hypocrisies and contradictions, in some cases just overt racism and sexism, Bernie is a stand-in for a profound contempt for working people in this country. That's why someone could still say now we're going back to, he's promising pony lines. And I could tell you that as someone who's not had health care and knows people who still are undercared, calling that a pony it's sociopathic.
It's grotesque.
It's absolutely grotesque. And the very functionality, and look, I'm sorry, I don't care her gender in this instance. This is a this is a multimillionaire. This is a family that owns buildings at NYU.
Yeah, we're talking to a representative of the Borg here.
This
more
is
than a woman or a man.
We're just talking about an oligarch. That's it.
I mean, her father was investing money before he was a teenager because he got it from his father.
Exactly.
Yeah, these are billionaires.
They're billionaires. They're worth $1.6 billion. This is the daughter from Succession, and she's on MSNBC using the cheapest, most weaponized identity trash in the book. Upshot of which, in reality, whether she even knows it or not, is I don't want to pay more, and you can die. And by the way, not only can you die, advocating for yourself is sexist. This is one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen on television. And I know that Warren has a wealth tax. It ain't as big as Bernie's. And I'm quite confident now. And this is where, look, Warren is not Hillary Clinton. She's not as far from Hillary Clinton as I'd like her to be, particularly on foreign policy, but she's not Hillary Clinton. But because now she is absorbing and benefiting from the professional middle class, right wing, corporatist, disingenuous caucus like Tishman, she's going to also, in that sense, have to take responsibility for her supporters. Anyways, I'm sorry, I had a lot to get off my chest there. Let's play this clip.
There's a ceiling. There is nowhere to go, but there is no up to go. And all of those support, I actually overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point.
Sorry, but remember when Tom Skoka was talking about ventriloquism of other people by pundits online? This is just another instance of that.
On Smarm. Good essay. Read it.
Overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you are still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
It's a good answer, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That's a good answer. You just completely smeared a whole electorate of people. Oh, blah, blah, blah. By the way, and again, I'm over the performance of plans. And this is another area where I'm annoyed, whatever. The Warren campaign did their brand thing. That's fine. I don't hold it against them. But the fetishization that people have of these so-called plans, first of all, they're blog posts. They're blog posts. And you're not convinced. I have yet to meet a single person who gives me that spiel. I go, oh, that sounds cool. What plans are you talking about? Oh, well, Oh, could you tell me some detail? I actually have read a couple of these plans. I've never met anyone who comes to me bragging about them and tells me that that's a reason to support her over Sanders who's read them. I literally have not met that person. I'm sure they exist. I've never met them. And now Bernie has quite detailed plans as well. So that's a moot point. But I mean, look, the bigger point here is just the disgusting, grotesque disingenuousness that we talked about before. But
Sure.
please, guys, have at it.
I mean, I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, first of all, when I talked before about how we need to be civil to the good faith Warren supporters, this is not who I was talking about. Right. This woman should know better. But even if she doesn't, right? Like maybe it's not at the forefront of her mind. Her fealty to her own class, her not wanting to pay more in taxes, wanting to block some sort of progressive ideology, blah, blah, blah. It might not be at the forefront of her mind. She might just be thinking, they're not that different. It's time for women. And she has the privilege to not have to think about anything else. Right. Because when you do come from a wealthy family, as a woman, like, yes, her only experience of any kind of oppression is probably along lines of gender. And it's probably less like, oh, my boss is sexually harassing me, but if I quit, I won't be able to feed my kids. And more along the lines of like longing to see yourself represented at the highest elite levels of government, you know? So that's not who I'm talking about. Right. But like, yeah, it's a privilege not to think about these things. Also, like, I gotta give Warren a bit of a shout out here because I feel like she's better than supporters like this. And I've seen a lot of the energy of the Yay Rah Hillary people going 100% behind Warren this time around. And like you said, they are very different. And I think what it reflects about these people is not necessarily that their ideology has changed substantially since 2016, but it's that they don't really care about ideology that much. They don't really care about policy.
I think it's 100% right. And I would just add, though, one, if Warren on a campaign basis wants to keep getting credit for it, she needs to disavow it. And the same demand is made of Sanders. And the second thing is that, yes, but she is not Sanders in terms of progressive and left, and she is turning into the new proxy for destroying the left. And it's starting to remind me, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's starting to remind me of Tom Perez versus Keith Ellison in the sense that like Tom Perez was the establishment saying, because people forget because he's been such a disaster, but he was known as like a real liberal inside that context. And he did some good things in his position in cabinet. But he was put up because they did not want an actual left presence in Keith Ellison. So she needs to, and look, I get the calculation of triangulating it, but then again, that actually leads back to the conversations that all of us are having in the left ecosystem, which is that's the lane, fine, but let's not gaslight and play games and pretend and lie and obfuscate about a center-left triangulator versus a crusading social democrat with a movement. Those are different things. And you can be honest about what you pick, but you can't lie about the distinction.
One final note, and this has less to do with the candidates and more to do with sort of the media and how inheritance is a bullshit subsidy. I'm reading Emily Tish Sussman's bio. Emily Tish Sussman has been at the forefront of the progressive movement in America for more than a decade.
Oh, I bet.
And I mean, she has less followers than all three of us.
Of course.
Like she has a third. Like she has 5,000 followers on Twitter. Of course. You've been doing this for a decade, and that's the following you've built up.
And I
mean,
just
not
want
to say that's the most important metric, but.
And when I just said,
mic drop.
And I just want to say, when I said like the daughter in Succession, that isn't, I don't actually just mean generically billionaire daughter, though I could, and I make no bones about it, but actually specifically, if you watch that show, part of her sort of cultivation of her being something different than her family is being involved as like a liberal political consultant. So she's completely the same as the rest of her family, but she has like a self-brand concept of being different. And, you know, whatever. I don't know the psychodrama of that family, but I do know that a billionaire is on television lying about people who are fighting for their very foundational existence. And that's absolutely disgusting, but they laughed at it, and it's normal programming on MSNBC, and that's grotesque, and I oppose it.
I mean, look, if I were a billionaire with a vested interest in maintaining some form of market capitalism in this country and in this world, and I, didn't want something worse to happen. I didn't want the pitchforks to come for me during the revolution. I would make a big show of supporting Bernie Sanders because he is the one who's going to reform, who's going to create the reforms that will keep capitalism going. Because guess what? If that doesn't happen, it's not like it's just going to go back to normal.
Would you like a really good, expansive New Deal, or do you want to fall, fully into barbarous fascism. And I think, honestly, I think some of these people who like to have the morality credits of posing, at the end of the day, don't care. They'll be in gated communities.
I think anybody who comes from a couple of generations of wealth on both sides and isn't basically taking the maximalist class antagonist position should keep their mouth shut.
100%. I agree completely. Well, but to be fair, there are a lot of people who share this belief about Bernie Sanders, and maybe we just talked about why maybe a billionaire oligarch should probably not be making that message on Trust Fund Babies, should probably not be talking about that on MSNBC. But how about a really prominent film producer?
This is from 2006.
Yes, this is, well, how about back in the day when it was a really prominent film producer making that same point?
She said to me that when Bernie said Hillary wasn't qualified, they took that a little sexist, just like, how could the Secretary of State, 103 countries that she visited, 2-time senator, first lady, civil rights lawyer, not be qualified?
Yeah, so just to remind people what that whole thing was about, speaking of disingenuous smears, is that it was floated that Hillary said Bernie that was the attack on Bernie, and Bernie said, "Well, let me just say in response to Secretary Clinton, I don't believe that she is qualified if she is through her super PAC taking tens of millions of dollars in special interest funds. I don't think you are qualified if you get $50 million from Wall Street through your super PAC." So it was a return for the unqualified thing. Apparently, only Hillary is allowed to call Bernie, a senator, unqualified.
Well, and that's another reason why I'm just being really clear about this stuff, because it's like, we know that, like, if they ever have a debate moment where he says, my friend and colleague, Senator Warren, who I respect a great deal, and in which case, in this one, like, that would actually be true. Yes. He would say, but we have a fundamentally different belief about medical debt or rent control. He'd do that, and then all of these people are going to say, did you see the leering sexism in his eyes?
Condescending.
Yeah, so it's just like, we can't play all that
And
bullshit.
Just one final note for me on the whole Washington Generals conversation we were having earlier. Tish Sussman was a former vice president of something at Center for American Progress.
I believe,
Jesus Christ.
I believe that.
But, like, I gotta say, like, I really do understand the desire to have a woman be president. And not everybody who has that desire is as privileged as this class enemy that we were just watching here. But you gotta think about the other stuff too. You gotta think about the big picture. You have to think about America's role in the world. You have to think about the people who are dying because they don't have health care. And all of those things are super important, and there's no contest.
Material consequences, folks.
Material consequences, folks. Well, I don't know as much about her as I should. I do know something about her. And I can't lie. I'm very strong Bernie partisan. But if she was in the race, this is clip number 11. If this candidate was in the race, then we can have a real conversation about two great candidates maybe being indistinguishable. I would need to know more about her domestic record. But this is Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who is the Prime Minister of Barbados. This speech at the UN General Assembly really caught my attention for a couple of reasons. One, because I'm quite invested in the project of counter-hegemony from the perspective of periphery countries in the Caribbean, but even sometimes in Northern Europe, certainly in Africa and so on. So she's speaking to that. And the courage it takes for the Prime Minister of Barbados to speak this way about Venezuela. Like, there is no, like, I mean, look, the United States is not going to invade Barbados, but I mean, Donald Trump has a global trade war that jeopardizes his reelection because of his, whatever he's made up in his head about China. I mean, so there's a lot of courage here on this clarity. And Mia Mottley is an incredible leader. I actually hope to interview her one day.
But what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter, principles of non-intervention. non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters. And that is what makes the actions of our Secretary General of the UN more laudable, for refusing to breach his own charter and take actions even though member states have hurled into the recognition of those unelected. That is why Barbados readily agreed to the request by Norway, and I salute my colleague Prime Minister who just left this platform, to host the talks between the Venezuelan parties. We salute the government of Norway for walking the walk and taking leadership in facilitating these talks. Equally, we regret that the talks have broken down. And we remind people that dialogue remains critical if there is to be a meaningful outcome and benefit for the Venezuelan people and its neighbors, not just its neighbors on the Latin American continent, but its neighbors in the Caribbean Sea, because people forget that Trinidad and Tobago is less than 7 miles from the coast of Venezuela. Our Caribbean Sea must remain a zone of peace, and for that we shall fight.
This is a really powerful leader. This is somebody who was honored by Rihanna recently for being the first woman prime minister of Barbados.
I love that so much.
It's awesome and big story in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
This destabilization, regime change efforts are having a major consequence on Trinidad and Tobago. I've been to Trinidad and Tobago, and I feel like Sarah Palin, but you can see Venezuela from certain parts of beach.
Yeah, with Bernie's foreign policy, can you imagine how you go into a coma for 4 years and you wake up and she's visiting him in the White House? How good you'd feel about the world.
So good.
Seriously.
Don't tempt me. Yeah, I was just going to make a self-deprecating joke about how I absolutely did not know about that geography. So everyone, study your globes, folks, and maybe you'll know where Venezuela is.
Mow the globe. It's really cool.
All right, let's take a few more calls, folks. I have a dentist appointment, so we're going to be ending pretty soon. Let's see. Let's looking around here. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is John in Philly.
Hey, John. What's going
on? Not much. I'm calling because I'm an undergraduate student right now, and I'm studying political science.
Yeah.
And I have this, and I have a professor, actually. I have 2 political science classes. One of them is about the EU.
Awesome.
Well, it would be awesome, but I have this professor who, this is interesting. I'm actually glad Michael's hosting, because you have a pretty strong view of world, global politics. Anyway. She teaches about the dynamics of the EU, but she has this very blatant, kind of right-wing sort of bend, kind of like The Economist,
right?
Magazine, right? So and she states these things as if they're, and she states certain things that are actually very biased and I would argue wrong about different countries and the EU, in the single market.
Mm-hmm.
And she states them as fact, and it really pisses me off.
Yeah.
Well, she sounds like she has a strong bias. Hold on, I'm nodding out for a second.
Little Jordan Peterson druggy impression there for you.
Well, that's actually funny because she assigned Steven Pinker books.
Wow, man.
Oh,
she does not sound like my cup of anything. So what's your question? You got a bum professor, but it's good, man. Sometimes you got to
just get the grade, man.
Yeah, get the grade and and by the way, learn how the enemy thinks.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, here's one question I have for you about some of the things she's said. She blames Greece for all of the economic issues that they face. She said that they spent too much and that basically what the EU is doing, strangling them and implementing austerity is right, and that they deserve it.
Jesus Christ.
So I would say, that's just so nuts. I don't, because I actually, to me, my understanding is like it's very conventional opinion now that, here's like a really brief gloss on Greece, and I haven't thought about it in a while. But basically, to the extent you could blame Greece, it is not for their social spending. It's because they do have, there's corruption, there's inefficiencies, whatever. Now, the center, right, the European core benefited from all of that. Like, I'm not remembering the specific deals, but
yeah, they invested a ton of money in Greece because they thought they were going to get a return on their investment.
But they already did,
and then,
because
Greece couldn't say no to it.
That's true.
They needed it.
But even on the upfront, they did, right? Like a lot of this, like, oh, Greece was so profligate. Well, you mean buying building equipment from Germany, doing, help Goldman Sachs facilitating deals to go private. Like there was so much money that was generated out of even the dysfunctional, practices.
Yeah, this was predatory lending. Don't get it twisted.
100%.
And
exactly.
It's a win-win for the ones doing the lending because they get a return on their investment. That's great. If Greece can't pay it back, guess what? It's on the backs of the Greek people, and Greece is fucked for a really long time.
Totally. And also when you read, even Varoufakis, I know he's 100% right that like it wasn't even a monetary question. It's a political question. It was like, if we torture Greece, that will threaten an Italy or another country from asserting, debt relief or protections of its workers, which, by the way, and this is another thing I'm sure your professor does not understand, is doubly dangerous because what happened in Greece, and I have some sympathy for Syriza. I don't know how much room for maneuver they had. They definitely failed, and they should have tried. They failed, but they were under a lot of objective forces and pressure, right? But what happens is Syriza totally submits, continues utterly gutting Greece, and so this flashpoint of hope of like an actual left gets destroyed and discredited. Guess what political party? And he actually recently miscalculated, so Matteo is sidelined. But if you look at Matteo, a actual neo-fascist in Italy, he was just total swagger with like, fuck the EU. They're not going to tell us how to handle all the labor policies. Crazy. Becomes the right-wing forces that are able to level accurate critiques at the European policy-making community. And then that reinforces the populist right-wing wave.
Yeah, that's how we got shit like Brexit.
Right. So it's all a disaster. Your professor's a fool.
Yeah.
But get the grade.
Yeah, I know. I have a tendency to, whatever I'm thinking kind of shows up on my face. So she'll be saying some of this shit and she'll look at me and all my face will be bright red. But,
look.
And,
maybe she has a crush on you, man. Maybe she's just like, I think Greece messed it up.
I would take
Maybe we could debate that later.
I would take this as an opportunity to learn as much as you can so you can win an argument with her. Because I've had this experience
I think I'm going to end up in a full-blown debate with her by the end of the year.
I know that I'm right, but I still can't win an argument because he's just the best arguer in the freaking world. And it really inspires me to learn more so that I can win next time.
Arguing with Sam is like arguing with the OJ defense team. It's like, I guess technically you're right.
Here's one small bit of advice.
But the blood was over there.
When you're arguing with somebody like that, especially a teacher in front of a class, the more they're talking, the better you're doing. So just ask questions that are going to be hard for her rather than having to, go on your own.
That's exactly what I would do. If you read like what actually happened in Greece and you even just read like Varoufakis' account, don't go in and quote Varoufakis and argue. Just formulate questions that you glean from that she's going to find a very hard time answering, because ultimately she's just going to give you a political answer, right? Like ultimately, it's just going to be like
simplistic these types of views.
Well, to be fair, on some level, it's all just simplistic kind of views. Like that's sort of my point. It's like part of it really does just come like at some point you're just making a normative decision of what your priorities are, and that's true of everything. The problem with economists is they always try to pretend
They're not doing that. Anyways, I appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
Oh, and check out episode 29 of the Antifada if you want a sort of detailed investigation of what happened with the Greek debt crisis.
Dope. Glad Matt is back, but can we add Brendan to the mic?
No.
No. I said no. Wow.
Oh, here he comes.
Wow. Why did you wait till so late in the show?
I'm busy booking for November and getting all that done today while I let Matt go away to New Orleans last
This is not beanbag.
Well, he's letting me on the mic now, so this is a reciprocal relationship, folks.
Yeah, this is I appreciate it.
He's not just sitting around twiddling his thumbs when the show is live.
Trust.
In a certain sense.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
All right, let's we got only like 3. I think we'll do one more sound, one call, and one IM. How about no? We'll do that one tomorrow. I saw Pete Buttigieg talk to Al Sharpton several months ago, and I said, I'm starting to feel like Pete Buttigieg, the only other interaction he had was when he fired the African-American police chief in his city. But if you thought that was awkward, look at Mayor Pete talk to workers.
Hopefully we can get it done. Yeah. What's the level of optimism this weekend? Well, as long as they're talking. Better talking than not talking.
Exactly. Yes.
Now, what resources do folks have in the interim? Is there any kind of bridge program or something to get folks through? Or the Northern Nevada Food Bank. Okay. We got the strike fund. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How long do you feel like the strike?
You're getting this?
No, sorry, you got to rewind that. That is unbelievable. The question he asks here. People need to hear this question.
Get folks through, or something to get folks through, or the Northern Nevada Food Bank. Okay. We got the strike fund. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How long do you feel like the strike fund can? I guess as long as it takes.
Yeah. They got a pretty good chunk of money in the fund. It's been 12 years since our last strike, so hopefully that'll sustain us for some duration.
Oh my God, he's basically asking them how long they're going to strike for. So there was a meme that somebody made of Buttigieg emailing GM saying,
exactly.
I tried, but I couldn't find out how long they're planning to do it.
Yeah.
How long do you guys think you can last?
So much food and stuff.
Yeah, so how much food do you guys have?
What are the coffers looking like?
What kind of indictment? And look, the Democratic Party is definitely not a traditional labor party in any type of mold. But however, it is a party that has had an alliance with labor unions and really at certain times, obviously during the New Deal in the 60s, delivered a lot of great things. And, this is the friendly, this is the wonder boy of the Democratic Party elite. And this guy, we are at the point now, like Bill Clinton was terrible for organized labor, but my God, did that guy know how to be like, so how's the strike going? This guy, he looks like, it's like, dude, you're not on a, I can't even think what the analogy would be. Like, nobody should look that uncomfortable talking to prospective voters in your primary. And these guys are just out striking. Why do you look so uncomfortable, man?
And look, I will take somebody with good policies and bad affect over someone like a Bill Clinton type.
How about both?
10 out of 10 times. But we have one who has both right now. So what's the problem?
And how about both in the other direction? In his case, his affect reveals his policies. What I'm trying to say.
Well,
it isn't just like, look, yes, I totally agree with you. Although there's a great JFK story. And I read this in a proper JFK biography, and this is where you really actually get some of JFK's charisma. He was in West Virginia talking to coal miners in the fucking 1960s. Like, could you imagine? And one guy finally, raised their hand. They say, have you ever done like an honest day's work in your whole life? And JFK looks around and he's like, I don't think so, I guess. And they all laugh and they're all like, well, I guess you weren't missing anything. And then they just get back to like, what they need, which he was actually at the time mostly happy to commit to. So it was like that, right? Like, and there's a power in that honesty and level of self-comfort that really diffuses a lot of stuff because it's honest. But like,
Buttigieg, I mean, part of the reason Clinton was good is there's a part of Clinton that should have known better because of his background in some ways. But like, I don't think Buttigieg has. I mean, he must know labor unions exist. His dad was a Marxist professor, but I mean, he just.
Oh God, I always forget about that.
He just has no. I mean, that's just. Whoa.
Him and Kamala.
I mean, the thing
apples fell off a cliff on those two instances.
Right. I looked up Buttigieg's labor plans, and actually, like, if you took his name off of it, there's some good stuff. $15 an hour plus index to inflation, and then a ban on right to work, which is all
That's
good.
the most important. I mean, I think I want to start seeing them. Rashida said 21. They should all follow her, or 20. I'm less. I mean, that's important, but it should be 20, 25. Ban right to work. That's a big deal.
But the thing is like I don't. You obviously can't trust him on that stuff.
Of course
and
not.
he doesn't have the. You'd need more than just plans, frankly, to appeal to people like that.
You need convictions. You need commitment.
Like he
you
doesn't.
need strategy.
He doesn't have a class analysis of how the economy is structured. He doesn't know shit about labor and capital. He thinks of organized labor as one more special interest group that he has to pander to.
Exactly. Final call of the day. You're calling from a 406 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Sorry, couldn't get to everybody. Obviously, we'll be back here tomorrow. 406. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, this is Brennan from Montana.
Hey, Brennan, what's going on?
Not much. How are you guys?
Good.
Well, I was actually, I guess to start off, solidarity with that first caller whom is potentially going on a strike.
Right.
Solidarity with the UAW workers, Lula Livre, Bash the Fash, and fuck Bill Gates.
Covering a lot of good bases there.
Yeah. I was hoping to actually ask you guys, I've been noticing online in various like Facebook groups and just different places that I'm strolling through the interwebs. A lot of people are having disagreements, and I've called in before and talked about my experience with Sunrise Movement locally, and so obviously I support the Green New Deal. But I've been seeing a lot of like, even within the left, but all over, honestly, there's a whole bunch of people that are extremely married to nuclear power.
Oh,
and
gosh,
so much so that like they think that, like even people on the left that I've seen, they don't like Bernie because he wants to phase out nuclear.
Yep.
And I'm like, how can you just cancel the strongest candidate because he wants to phase out nuclear? I understand we can't phase it out right now, maybe, but shouldn't that be on the like list of,
I don't even, my understanding is I don't even know if he's talking about phasing it out. I think he's actually just doesn't include a big investment in it for his Green New Deal. He doesn't include it at all. I mean,
okay.
My thing is like clearly somehow nuclear technology became, and I know I mispronounced that word and people are just going to have to deal with that.
It's pronounced nuclear.
Yeah, and that's never going to be. Thank you, Jamie, because I would like to tell that person that Jamie's embodying so well right now. I'm never going to pronounce it correctly. So just breathe that in. But it's become, there are these techno fixes and scientific solutions that really become a form of deep magical thinking for people. So, I've said, I'm willing to have it. Well, I'm not particularly willing to have a debate on it, to be honest with you, because it's just not remotely as important as like infinitely other more important things to talk about. But the political reality is, do you support and trust things as they are constituted now to go on a massive power plant construction spree? Like, do you think that that is safe? Do you think that that's cost effective? Do you have answers for the fact that we have material from these plants that we still don't know how to deal with? And I understand that people say, no, it's these new da-da-da-da-das and it takes care of all the problems. I don't buy it. And I have not. And to the extent I've actually looked at like real literature on it, there's a lot of optimism, but it does not have the same kind of like utopian hope that people seem to have with it. So I think that once you take on, radical deployment of green technologies, you deal with things like obviously deforestation,
But you need to redesign cities. You need public transport. You really need to do these things. Like even nuclear, even like I'll totally grant that France, has better relative emissions because of that. But I also will tell you this, that Germany's been phasing those out and they still hit the best targets. And there's no way around dealing with, really, I would say actually how people transport themselves. I mean, and agriculture.
Yeah, Dan.
I think that one thing people need to look at too, that the Green New Deal just talks kind of broadly about renewables, but most people think wind and solar. But if you look abroad, like hydroelectric is huge, and it's what runs a majority of some countries. And I was doing some reading, and honestly, when we built all of our dams decades ago, we only utilized like 10%, if that, of our waterways to produce hydroelectric power. And I think if we, do something about that.
That has big environmental implications too. So, that's a serious, dams are problematic. But look, everything you're saying is total. I mean, look, China's doing a lot of this stuff and they are focusing on the things you're talking about. So I just, and also, I'm sorry, I know that there is a certain type of very linear person that hates these points, but I'm sorry, like Nassim Taleb, he calls it the turkey principle. Like every day a turkey wakes up on a farm, in its head there is a 1,000,000 to 1 probability that it will live out another day having a great time chilling out on a nice little family farm, until it doesn't and it gets its head chopped off. Like when these things have problems, they are monumental, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just
Dan
don't
Crenshaw was concerned about this online this weekend. It's like, if Republicans want to start talking about all this stuff, then pass a nuclear bill. Let's see what happens with it. But like, I don't think it's a priority of the left at all.
It's definitely not a priority of the left.
If we have the option to transfer to clean energy without having to utilize something that might cause a second Chernobyl, I feel like we should take it.
I would go with that. Final IM of the day, Nomad. Big fan. The Barbados PM speech was great. How do you guys reconcile non-interventionism with the argument the BJP supporters use to defend human rights abuses in Kashmir, or Duterte defending his insane drug policy? Well, I'm not a non-interventionist. I'm talking, this is why I work with Daniel Bessner. There are all sorts of other ways, and by the way, also for all countries to apply pressure, because I don't have a problem with China releasing reports and using its diplomatic corps to talk about the United States prison and racial policing policies. I think that's great. So there's a lot of other tools. The State Department, I have no problem with the State Department should release what it knows about what's happening in Kashmir. Sanctions that are not on an entire population, I think they can be selective and put at leaders or specific financial institutions. I don't necessarily have a problem with. So I think that we really need to decouple the idea that, just even practically, because, say we wake up on this, say Bernie Sanders is president, and all of a sudden you have somebody who might actually try to use U.S. foreign policy in a constructive way. You still need to actually fill that in with detail. You're not going to just stop doing stuff. And so the detail of what you do needs to change radically. And there are diplomatic tools. That's another major failure of the modern era. Diplomacy exists. It isn't literally just bomb people or pass genocidal sanctions regimens. There's other things to do. That's my shorthand.
Yeah, there's a difference between being anti-interventionist and anti-imperialist as well.
That's right.
And I would hope some future U.S. would reflect the foreign policy of anti-imperialism, but not be dumb about it. Not everything that the U.S. does is inherently imperialist. I also object to the sort of dumb anti-imperialists who think it's bad that the Obama administration was supporting the Kurds in Syria with some limited airstrikes. I think that's a good thing. If we had a conflict on the level of the Spanish Civil War, right, I would certainly hope that a sort of social democratic U.S. would help the leftists in that fight.
Roosevelt tried to.
So
Roosevelt tried to. He tried to sell arms to the Republican
Should have done
government.
more, but yeah.
He should have done more, but he did try to, and the Congress killed it. And I think the Kurdish example is a great example because, of course, the United States is not doing it because they care about having solidarity with Rojava, but it's within their strategic interest. And this is the point I always make, and some people get it and some people don't. But I want Russian presence in Venezuela because I want to disincentivize U.S. regime and military action there. 100%. I want Chinese presence in Latin America for the same reasons. And if the United States having a presence in Rojava blocks Turkish plans for genocide, good. Like, that's how you also have to start to, and you need to really start thinking about, like Lula has talked about recently, that the BRICS needed to have been an actual alternative institution with an alternative currency and counter-hegemonic forces. But these are all conversations for, I guess, all of our lives. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101